haven't played Injustice Gods Among Us yet. I may not play it at all since I'm not enough into fighting games to spend money on it and I'm not well versed in the genre to review it. But I have a problem with the story, which I saw through the magic of YouTube. The basic premise is that the Joker kidnaps a very pregnant Lois Lane and poisons Superman into thinking she's Doomsday. He fights her and ends up killing her with a special Joker bonus. When her heartbeat stops, a nuclear bomb detonates and wipes out the entirety of Metropolis. Mad with grief, Superman punches a hole through the clown's chest and moves to establish a one-Earth government ruled by the Justice League, who will end conflict and bring about peace and order throughout the entire planet. The story isn't exactly original. The first other such story that comes to mind is the Justice Lords arc in Bruce Timm's Justice League animated series about a decade ago, as well as the graphic novel Red Sun, an Elseworld story in which Kal-El landed on Soviet Russia instead of Kansas and he was raised by Stalin himself. After Stalin's passing, Superman sees the suffering of common folk who are plagued by poverty and crime and decides to take over the empire and create a utopia. Despite his great intentions, he ends up being a stern dictator who does more than just a few questionable things until he realizes the evil he has caused, fakes his own death, and lets humanity take its course through democratic methods. It's a fantastic story that everyone should read, mainly because it respects the character's integrity and only asks the big questions. Superman still carries his inherent goodness and kindness, and his oppressive regime comes about as a result of that, instead of being one-dimensionally evil just because he was raised by a horrible person such as Stalin. Not so much with Injustice, where Superman's personal pathos makes him a boogeyman, a broken man with far too many powers who not only creates this order of oppression, but becomes downright brutal. Toward the end of the story, and here is a spoiler alert, he burns a hole through Captain Marvel's head with his heat vision because Cap tells him that his plan to flatten Metropolis and Gotham as a show of power may be a tad too far. The brutality in and of itself isn't the problem, but the place it comes from is. It's a parallel universe story which already undermines the drama and the message, but it also fails to juxtapose the good heroes against the bad ones, as both of the involved dimensions seem almost identical. Meaning the Earth 1 regime established by Superman and the most important key players of the Justice League since Batman only did so because of the events in Metropolis, i.e. the nuke, and not because of a substantial difference in principles and ideals they uphold. Only problem is that the DC universe has always been about the ideals the heroes uphold. Marvel's relatability comes from their heroes being regular people with a superpower or two, whereas DC's are larger-than-life characters whose relatability comes from how relevant the questions they ask are to our world. That's why Kingdom Come, another fantastic graphic novel, worked so well. The message wasn't about the abuse of power from extremely powerful beings, but rather the question whether or not we, humanity, want our heroes to stick to their values and the principles they uphold, or if we'd rather allow them into the gray line if that meant cleaning up the streets from some pretty damn awful elements. Principle versus practicality. It was a question relevant to our societies and even human nature, as the need for safety is innate in all of us, and for that the story was great. But in Injustice, the theme is abuse of power. This could have worked in the 60s when seeing the Blue Boy Scout that rescues kittens from trees turning batshit insane would have been shocking. But in 2013, the most popular superhero is Batman, who is technically not even a superhero. We know there is abuse of power by people far more powerful than us, we see it constantly all around us, and we enable it even inadvertently. The question about our greatest heroes becoming our greatest villains is one that is no longer relevant to our world. It's not a what-if scenario for us, it's reality. As such, the whole subtext rings hollow. Since we're not shown a single shot of the world Superman has created from the citizen's viewpoint, the framework is shaky and the context lacking. We can't really formulate an opinion on whether or not that world works and what's wrong with it. That one incident, however tragic, does not provide enough of an insight to the One Earth government dimension because there is nothing to compare it to. Our heroes are good simply because they escaped the same event. It's not because they think differently, it's not because they have been raised differently, or they uphold different values. Essentially, they too are ticking bombs waiting to explode. So what is the message? Is there even a message? Obviously not. Despite the story offering nearly 2 hours of cinematics, most of it really boils down to a silly comic book story that gives these characters a reason to fight. Of course, the bigger question does remain if there is need for more than just that in this type of game. I'd argue there is, partly because DC's characters are defined by the message they try to get across, especially in these grand team and crossover events. It's hard to properly portray Superman when you don't focus on the duality of his character and his philosophical roots. The super part isn't so much because of his physical attributes, but because of his innate goodness, the result of someone who has surpassed our human sensibilities and limitations and operates differently within our own society. In that regard, Injustice doesn't feature Superman at all, except maybe toward the end. It features Clark Kent with far more superpowers than he can handle, and as such it neuters the character. Likewise suffers Warner's beloved Batman, a character whose shtick is his questionable methods and somewhat moodier worldview, but who is portrayed 100% on the right here without any backstory to justify his opposition to the regime. Yes, it's in character for Batman to not want that one Earth shit, but that's because he's a paranoid sociopath with a somewhat pessimistic view of life. Even though the story is very much a Bat-wonk fest, and Bat fans will be fairly satisfied with his portrayal in the story, he would have benefited greatly from a dramatic standpoint from having a hand in the rise of the regime. After all, it was Batman that created Brother Eye in the comics, a supercomputer designed to monitor the world and metahumans 24/7 in case they went out of control. If Superman had used Brother Eye in his regime, Batman's paranoia would have had a direct involvement in the rise of the oppressive government, giving the character some valid drama and asking the right questions outside of me good, they bad. And these two are the lucky characters. Everybody else has zero development of any sort, and they just exist to make their contractual JLA appearance. The story misses a gigantic opportunity with Hal Jordan, whose entire point is being a somewhat aloof person that turns out to hide enough willpower to be a superhero. His turn to the Sinestro Corps in the game, who operate on fear, would have made a great little subplot for the character, especially considering that as a Lantern, Jordan is essentially a thankless space cop, and abuse of power is a constant danger in his profession. That's the type of obvious question that is relevant to our society and our world that the game mysteriously misses. Similarly, they miss a great opportunity with Captain Marvel, who has always adored these superheroes and would follow them to the ends of the universe. They could have done a lot with his recruitment in the regime, as he has always been the stand-in for the devoted readers, and he could have directly asked the audience what side they would join. Something similar had happened in the second season of Justice League Unlimited. The women suffer the most as they only exist as bit characters or get no development at all, with the exception of Harley Quinn. Wonder Woman in particular is infuriating. I don't even like the character, but the evil Wonder Woman exists to be evil Superman's sex doll, while the good Wonder Woman embodies the Smurfette principle to its last overwritten punctuation point. The one time she actually does something and tries to rally the Parallel Dimensions Amazons behind her, her peace shtick is written so that it comes off as a 1950s wife telling her kids that their job is to calm down daddy who's angry because that's what men are. Well, that and drunken rapists. And you thought skimpy outfits were what's wrong with women in games. In the end of the day, it does seem like I'm nitpicking, and honestly, I am. This is a RANT after all. Where there's a review of the actual game, I couldn't realistically have had many expectations from the story to a fighting game. But that shouldn't immediately be reasons for dismissal. Warner acquiring Nether Realms means they can expand beyond capturing the magic of Capcom's Marvel vs. titles, and seeing how long the cutscenes to the game's story mode are, there is potential for strong storytelling in the genre. The fact that this is a fighting game excuses the lack of subtext and characterization, but it's not a blank check of support for this type of thing. With their license to use DC Comics characters, Nether Realms have the opportunity to truly revolutionize the fighting genre and garner larger audiences, as many, myself included, will jump at the opportunity to play a game, any game, that features our favorite characters and respects them. I won't blame the writer of Injustice for the lackluster story because I don't know what the man was really hired to do, but I will blame the story for not realizing its full potential, and I can only hope that they can at least use this as an early blueprint to better narratives in follow-up games.